Hey Sean, afternoon. Thank you so much for being here today with us. How are you doing?
Really well, thanks, Shapri. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I know recently you started to post so much on LinkedIn, and I'm getting a lot of value from what you're posting. I'm sure other people are getting a ton of value from it as well. So it's really great to have you on here. For those people who don't know you, I'd love to just start with a little bit about who you are and who Aircall are.
Yeah, sure. Oh, thanks, Shapri, and thanks for saying that you're taking some value from it. It's quite fun, to be honest. I think I'd
Yeah.
hesitated for a while from posting, and I think I'd maybe even told myself that any value I had, I should just be sharing with the team. But I think I said I got to a point where I was asking the SDRs to start posting, and I wasn't doing it myself. So lead by example. But yeah, my background. So yeah, nice to meet everybody. My name's Sean. Sean Hayes. I'm the VP of Global Business Development at Aircall. So for those not familiar with Aircall, Aircall drives value for sales and support teams that make and receive calls by integrating their business phone in there across their tech stack. And I've been at Aircall for coming up to 5 years. In that time, have built out the sales development function as it is today. And prior to Aircall, I'd worked in sales for 10 years as well. I'd kind of done the inbound, outbound, AE enterprise pathway, and then find myself into management. And and yeah, I suppose when you're in IC, you really enjoy climbing that mountain again and again and again. But as soon as you get a taste for helping other people climb their mountain, you realize I don't know, it's more sustainable. So I very purposely stayed in sales development. I think it's a really nice space to help give a platform for people to achieve what they want to achieve, or maybe even things they didn't think they could achieve. And so yeah, that's why I'm where I am.
Amazing. And I think you've done such a phenomenal job with building the Aircall BDR team. I know when I first came across Aircall, it was when the BDR team were quite small.
Mm.
It was at a sales confidence event, and the team were great. But I know that since then, like you mentioned, you've gone from leading the Europe team to EMEA team to global team. So I'd love to just double click on that a little bit, Sean. If I think it's been over a year since you've moved to the global role. Am I right?
Yeah.
What's kind of been the things that have stood out to you from transitioning from Europe to global, and what are some of those differences that you've had to navigate?
Hmm. Yeah, so we had. I suppose when I first joined Aircall, I'd only had experience really working in the UK and Ireland and Australia, and I came to Aircall and I was managing Northern Europe, so I was working with the DAC, Benelux, and Nordics market, and I had a very it was very obvious, not just with the people I was managing, but listening to prospects in the market that I needed specificity in terms of like a playbook for both markets in terms of how we sell into those people, and also how I manage the people in those markets. As I say, there's a lot of cultural differences. So that was a really good testing bed for kind of that logic. And then I expanded after a few years to then working with the Spanish speaking markets and the French speaking market. And again, needless to say, a lot of cultural specificities. There's and a lot of learning that took place. And I think with each of kind of every time I went into one of those markets, it was really a sense of just being curious, assuming absolutely nothing, asking loads of questions and seeking to understand, and really going in to work each day, looking to learn from the BDRs. And then, so no difference really than working with North America and APAC. I mean, working with North America has been really fun. It's a market that I had connections with sales and business development leaders over here already, because it's a market of early adopters, and it's a market of or where you see a lot of new techniques or new strategies being tried out within sales. So coming and not working in the market myself is fun. I suppose now I have to be that early adopter myself, and
Mm.
And so yeah, that's probably the biggest shift since working with North America.
Interesting. And you said two things there, which was, how what the specificity is for the market, i.e., what are our prospects and customers saying, and then how you manage those people. And I think, I've managed teams in Singapore and New York, and they're very, very different. And actually, it's not this kind of one size fits all global playbook. So as you think about managing, different regions, different teams, how much of this is like I want to have everything standardized globally, and this is the Aircall BDR way of doing things, and how much has got to be unique to each region? Because I'm sure we have people that are listening to this that are tasked with building out teams in new regions, and that's always a tricky first step to make.
Mm. I think going in, the first thing to understand is probably like the math that underpins everything. So kind of looking to the bottom of the funnel, trying to see what conversion rates are at each step, from accounts that are going in to the positive connects or positive response to emails or calls, to the number of discovery calls, to the number of created ops qualified. So really digging into that funnel initially and trying to see, I suppose, what the benchmarks are for success in each. And then it's trying to delve into what are the kind of what is driving success, and even looking historically what's driven success on those metrics. So I'm looking at an open rate in the Netherlands of 45% and a reply rate of 15%. Is that something that's actually been this way for forever? Is this something that's just a new trend within this cadence? So like I really dive into the data, ask loads of questions, and try and speak to as many people as possible within the market, so that I don't just kind of take what I see for granted. I think it's in that sense it's about being empowered by data but not led by it. I think early
Yeah.
on I used to kind of be data led, where I would see something and I would kind of draw a conclusion from it. And I've made enough mistakes to realize that there's so much nuance to absolutely everything. And I try and unpack that nuance by just, as I said, asking lots of questions. So yeah,
Yeah.
you never fail by doing too much preparation, too much work, and too much research. I mean, obviously there's paralysis by analysis, but what I'm talking about here is really just like laying the foundations to build out your strategy. So there you go.
I love what you said about being empowered by data. I think so many people try and make data 100% of the story. It's kind of the narrative that backs that up. And I'm big on leading indicators and having a look at those, but actually it's then what is the narrative behind that. And I'm sure you're seeing a lot. We've talked a little bit about the team, but as you said at the start, Aircall services sales and service teams, so you must be seeing a lot with prospects and customers that you're speaking with. um I'm keen to get into what's working for Aircall right now, but also what are some of the challenges that you're hearing from prospects that you're speaking to? What are people coming, and what use cases are landing?
Mhm.
But maybe let's start with the Aircall piece first. What's working for your team right now, Sean?
So a focus, I'd say, on ICP and intent, and I suppose that's kind of making sure that you're really swimming in the right pools when it comes to driving good conversion. So maybe this sounds like every other person on LinkedIn at the moment, but I suppose it does boil down to two data points or two bits of scoring. So like our account score, so making sure we have ICP accounts in there, and we can prioritize those accounts. An intent score as well, so engagement signals, both internal and external engagement signals. Um, that's basically it. I think it's like a 3 years ago, something like 20% of the market was in a position to buy. At the moment, something like 5% is. So
Wow.
it's really, it's kind of finding that 5%, of course, but it's also it's you have to be much more specific if you're going to land there now. And you have to be much more intentional and specific in terms of the type of messaging you're sending them to um, to get it to convert.
And I mean, without stating the obvious here, what do you think that decrease from 20% to 5% is really down to? What do you think is happening?
I mean, I suppose when I first joined Aircall 2019, just pre-COVID, there was the the push really was at that time was to try and convince people that digitalization was something that they needed to accelerate, and they didn't want to be catching up a few years down the line. Then COVID hit. Everyone knows the story. Everyone had to accelerate, and I suppose that was what brought people to the market, and that was really, I think, I suppose that's the time at which a lot of companies maybe thought, this is cool. We're getting a lot of inbound. There's a lot of let's just continue to invest in the same channels that we were previously and hope that the results continue. Whereas realistically, market forces have changed. There's less people that are just ready to buy, and luckily ourselves at Aircall, we kind of realised that relatively quickly, and we started adapting and started looking to more of an all-bound motion. And as I said, kind of looking to understand where that 5% was swimming, and
Mm.
building out a really good strategy outside of that 5% to land at the right people within the right ICP, and then nurture those people up to a point at which they were ready to buy.
And I think from what I'm hearing right now is that's where people are really struggling, is that 95%. And I think that's where people are struggling to, I'm sure you're hearing the same, right? Outbound doesn't work, the phone's dead, you can't, rely on outbound BDRs anymore. The SDR function is dead. All these kind of what I would consider um, not necessarily accurate statements.
Mm.
But that's where I'm hearing is really tough to crack that 95%. So where, and you mentioned nurturing there, but where are the Aircall team having success in engaging outside of intent and engagement?
So that 5% is all about timing, and whether you can find them and get in there early. The 95% is about, I'd say, mastering timing. And with that, from an Aircall perspective, our strategy for that is revisit dates. So we know that we're going to speak to a lot of people who they might have pains in their phone system, or how they're working at the moment. We want to establish real business pains where the like taking something on like Aircall is not just a nice to have, but it's a must have, and qualify for that pain. And then it's about putting a revisit date to the time at which realistically, and I know this sounds quite transactional, but we know that their existing contract could come up, and then we stick with them in that time, and we continue to educate, we continue to nurture, and a BDR starting today would come in, and they might each month add 5 to 10, 15 revisit dates, which means that when they're coming in August, September, they've basically halfway to their target just with those revisit dates. And if you qualify those revisit dates at kind of a high level, so they're not just people being polite and saying, I might be interested in August or anything else, but you really qualify for that pain at that early stage, then it can be a reliable source of pipeline further down the line. And also it makes things more scalable when you do have movement in the team, whether it be people who get promoted to account executive and we bring someone new in. We know that SDR going to account executive is leaving behind 30, 40 revisit dates, and it makes what we're doing a lot more scalable in terms of backfilling and making sure that we don't have any sort of drop in pipeline with that as well.
Okay, so that's quite an effective trigger for you. Actually, we know someone's has to do something with their phone system by a certain date, and that's something that you can then you follow up on, and that in itself is a form of intent.
Yeah, it's quite. I suppose that's quite. It sounds quite transactional and maybe unique to Aircall, and I'm sure if you were selling, no, I mean I think it's a similar strategy that can be employed by lots of software
Yeah.
companies. That I've seen sales often outreach do similar things. They're always trying to get that trigger of when the contract's going to end, so they can be in the conversation with it as well. And so, yeah, I think it's something that's scalable, and has really worked for us over the years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's flip this, and I'm keen to hear what feedback your team are providing in terms of what are the prospects and customers that they're speaking to you saying? I'm sure that you speak to a lot of sales leaders who you're prospecting into, and I know you just mentioned that it's not a time for nice to have tools; it's got to be must haves,
Yeah.
right? So what kind of feedback are you hearing from the market? Where do you think the biggest opportunity lies right now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things we do at Aircall at the very start is try to qualify where people see value in their phone system. So some people, they see it from a quantitative perspective. They want to drive productivity. They want to make more calls and get through a high volume. And then there's some people that really want to drive the quality of what they're doing as well. And whether it be from a coaching perspective, and make not just more calls but better calls. I'd say there's been a real switch from people that are quite focused on quantity, to that focus on quality. And I think that maybe speaks to what we were discussing earlier, which is, I think prospects are sick of just being a number, basically. And
Mm.
they have grown thicker skin to it. If you have to earn that conversation a lot more now. And maybe this is an interesting insight, but sometimes we would have sales leaders who weren't interested at all in the coaching features previously, and it became almost a bit of a, not a running joke, but like we would always be pitching on quantity because the only thing they really seemed to be caring about was how they could get their team to make more calls. But now it really has flipped, and when we're kind of talking about problems that might resonate with sales leaders, it's how they can drive conversion on the calls they're making rather than how they can just get those numbers up.
That's really interesting, and we've had a lot of guests from my sales coach on the podcast who are trying to fix that problem
Yeah,
of
yeah,
fractional coaching, and that's something that they mentioned as well. It's actually no longer about like we need to just do more and output. It's about the how do we do more with less, and how do we actually do more quality. And that's interesting that you're hearing that as well. Have your team had to adapt their messaging quite a lot to readjust with the prospects' priorities?
yeah. We definitely have adjusted to it, and kind of spoken that track about doing more with less, and that's definitely resonated with people as well. Um, you mentioned my sales coach, and I think what they're doing is really timely as well. And maybe some people would be surprised by having that human to human coaching in this moment. But I suppose with the advent of generative AI and what that can do, it kind of leads that gap for kind of building on the humanity, on the human first approach. I think actually I think Outbound really comes down to art, science, and math. So I think if you've got on the art, it's the sales skills and the competencies needed to be successful at your outreach, and that's really, and it could be cold calling or personalizing outreach. And I say it's an art because whilst there are formulas for success, um, each person has their own creative edge as well, and the personality that they can bring to what they do. And I think like you need to build that confidence in the formula of what you're doing, so you can really bring that out, and you only really get that in person to person coaching. Then on the science side, it's the constant iterative process of raising the bar in everything that you do. And then on the math,
Yeah.
I mentioned before, it's the numbers that underpin everything. If you do this many dials and this many emails, you get this much pipe. And I think for far too long, sales has relied on math. And if you do these numbers, you'll succeed. And I mentioned prospects are tired of being a number. And this is why I think the art and the science is pretty much the most important thing now. I say on the art, sales training, coaching is more important than ever. For the science, I think it's back to that piece on ICP and intent. Who are you
Yeah.
messaging? How are you messaging them?
Yeah, I love the way that you've articulated that, the because I think we always talk about sales, is sales a science or is it an art? But actually I think it's a blend of all three of these things. And I think to me, I think art is probably the one that's underinvested in the most,
Mm.
because I think coaching and training always gets put to the wayside because people don't have the time, but also then the math isn't associated, so there's no data driven aspect.
Yeah.
You throw dollars at a training program or a coaching tool or something like that, then there's that, there historically hasn't been a good way to measure the outcome of that. But I'm just interested in how you strike that right balance of art, science, and maths in your team.
Mm. It's a good question. I think firstly you need to have the support of your CRO and CFO too. That they're not just and they're seeing the investments that you're putting into the team and also the strategies you're putting into the team. That it's not just like a button that you press and you'll see a number. That it's something that you're building over time. So I think actually just having that trust is one of the first things we've needed in the space to build out effective strategies over time. I think how we manage to have the balance within our team. So the math is something that doesn't go away because it's important. If you can't measure something, you can't control it. But I'm
Yeah.
measuring like I'm not somebody who would ever be going to a dashboard and looking at one metric in isolation on one day and drawing any sort of conclusion on it. Whereas I think a lot of people are like, why didn't you make 60 dials today? So it's just it's how you manage that number and how again it's how you kind of be empowered by data. It's how we get the math balance right whilst also keeping an idea of what is a blueprint for success.
Yes.
On the art, honestly, I think it's hire good people and they'll find a way. That's something I've kind of always thought. And when I joined Aircall, I said 2019, we didn't have as big of a team. We didn't have as many well built out processes as we do now. And probably the best thing I could do at that time, and luckily I managed to do, was hire some good people who could help build those processes out, hire some good team leads and managers over time who could help make processes that we had better. So that is that you kind of having the humanity. If humanity is important, the creative edge is important. Then hiring good people that can bring that to the table and can develop what you're doing is the most important thing there. And then science is just striving for perfection, but never expecting it. I suppose it's never like having this sense of always being happy with what you're doing, but never really
Yeah.
satisfied with what you've got right now. And I think if you marry those two things, you've got that kind of I call it like a healthy obsession with improvement.
I love, or so many phrases, by the way, that I've scribbled down that I like. But yeah, striving for perfection but not expecting it. I think that's a good way of putting it. There was something you said there about hiring good people and something you did well at the start of Aircall and that's set you up for success. I'm interested in your opinion of has the way you hire or the profile that you hired, has that evolved at all or changed at all in the 5 years that you've been at Aircall? Have you looked for the same thing? Have you looked for, has your competencies and skill set changed? Has the profile changed at all? You've been there a while now, so I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's when I first came in, I was the kind of profile I suppose I'd look for is somebody who was really curious, so like really asking a lot of questions and wanting to learn. A question I always ask in the interview, actually, because I'm usually at this step, like the last step. I wanted to know what they've learned in the interview process they didn't know at the start. If somebody's getting into SaaS sales for the first time, I want to know like what have they learned about SaaS sales in across all their applications. And you'd be surprised how many people aren't conscious of what they have learned or aren't taking stock of it. Whereas when you get somebody
Yeah.
his eyes light up in that moment when you talk about a learning and they talk about all the things they've learned and what's been interesting, you can tell that that's somebody who has a thread and pulls at it. And I think that's one of my favorite questions to try and to understand that curiosity. Somebody that's highly accountable as well. So whether it be preparing for certain steps or doing that little bit of research before an interview, it's a pretty much an absolute prerequisite for me, because I think if you see somebody who's willing to put in that extra mile and that extra effort for the interview, that just kind of speaks for what they'll do in the role themselves. So that's two things I always look for. In terms of profile, whether it's experience or not, it depends on what maybe the team needs at that time. If there's a team who is maybe struggling with their cold calling,
Yeah.
like sticking to a script and getting it to work, hiring someone in who has that little bit of experience in doing that, so they can actually kind of see success, believe it a lot more than just me saying this will work. Will be something I would hire for. So I kind of maybe look for the gaps in the team when it comes to competencies and actually try and hire some experience. But if you've got a team that's singing um, from the same hymn sheet or is actually going along pretty nicely, there's I'm just looking for those other competencies that I mentioned, like
Yeah.
curiosity, the energy, the accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And has that changed at all in the last couple of years as the market's got tougher?
Um, has it changed? I mean, I think we went from a candidate-led market a
Yeah.
few years ago where they could just kind of point in all directions and get any role that they wanted, to the opposite of that, really, where there was a lot of good talent in the market and we could have, as companies, our pick a little bit. And that was helpful actually for me, because there was a time where I maybe flicked this idea that we should just be hiring people with experience. And I did that and maybe hired some people with experience over others that I had a better feeling about just because they had that experience. And I've learned that that's not necessarily the right thing to do. I'd much rather have somebody who is a little bit greener, maybe hasn't even used Salesforce before. I don't actually care, because if they've got those competencies that I mentioned before, and curiosity, they're going to learn fast. They're going to dive in. They're going to kind of make the most of the opportunity. And that's maybe another thing as well. I quite like somebody who actually, I think it's really important you have somebody that's grateful for the role and the opportunity. I think if you're grateful for it, then you make the most of it. And I think if people have just come from another SaaS company where they've come board straight out of uni and they've never really had to hustle, um,
Yeah.
then uh, they sometimes don't make the most of it and they start making excuses. I kind of want somebody who's maybe even sold a product that is not a market leader and they've really had to struggle to sell whatever
Yeah.
that is, um, because then when they come to Aircall, they find it a little bit easier and they appreciate what they've got.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms before. Um, I hired someone once who was really unhappy at their previous company, which is partly why people move, right?
Mm,
But um, they came with a lot of resentment,
mm,
and that didn't necessarily go away, because I think they'd already got it in their head that the SDR role is a really difficult role, prospecting is really difficult. AEs are ungrateful, marketing's useless, all this sort of stuff that they'd carried from their previous role. And actually, that resentment's really difficult to chip away at. And I think, to your point, if you have gratitude for the opportunity, you're willing to work the extra mile and make sure that it works because you do have that gratitude. So I
exactly.
hadn't really thought about it in those terms before, but that's really interesting.
I think it's also like every company has some shit to it, and it's like there's good
Yeah.
shit and there's bad shit. And I think only from working and maybe like having a few different experiences do you realize what is good shit and kind of what your own non-negotiables are. And I remember in like the third company I came into, actually the first two companies I came into, everyone, including myself, was moaning about products and the backlog in the roadmap, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. They get to the third company, I realize everyone's doing it. I'm like, okay, well, and I even explained to my boss at that time, this is the same pretty much in every company. And then by the fourth and fifth, you
Yeah.
realize that just like don't be that person that's just start talking about things that you can't affect.
Yeah.
It's actually a weird anecdote, but when I was at university, I worked actually as a personal trainer. You wouldn't know now, but I worked as a personal trainer for like 3 or so years in the summers, and I wanted to do it well, so I bought a book called The Six Figure PT, and I never got to those numbers, by the way. But I in the book, on pretty much in the first page, it said there's two types of personal trainer. There's the one that is on the gym floor with with a kind of clipboard, going up to people, being proactive, trying to seek out customers and clients, and being on the front foot. And then there's the ones that kind of sit in the lobby, talking about how there's nobody in the gym, it's impossible. like just drink your coffee and moan about things. And I went in the next day with the clipboard that I think I borrowed off like my mum or something, and I printed out all these forms that I was going to go up to people and basically do discovery questions. And as I was going into the gym, there was another PT walking out, a guy called John, and he was like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "The gym." He's like, "Why?" And he's like, "There's no one in there." And I was like, he was like, he honestly looked at me. He's like, "Come have a coffee." And I was like, "This is it. This is what they said in the book." So I went into the gym, and he was right. There was literally like one person in there. But I went up to him, and he was a guy called Justin Atkinson. So you can see where the story's going. But I spoke to him. He ended up signing up. His wife signed up. It led to other referrals as well, and it basically like paid my way for a long period. And I kind of always took that into everything I was doing as well. Like I never wanted to be that person. I always want to be the person with the clipboard on the front foot. And I suppose
Yeah.
it's also
Yeah.
trying to hire people that have that attitude as well. Yeah.
That's great. And that I mean, that story is so translatable to, other things. Are you the rep that's waiting for your phone to ring from the prospect that said they were going to call you back, or are you going to do something about it? So, that's so translatable. But so, and by the way, I'm grateful for the fact that I wasn't the first one to swear on this podcast. So thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. And
But
that anecdote, that anecdote would have been too long to put into LinkedIn as well. So we've saved a job there.
yeah, there we go. There we go. The last thing I wanted to touch on was a post that you recently wrote on LinkedIn. And you were talking, your advice to other SDR leaders was, iterate with what you have, don't just rip and replace. And I think, there's probably a lot of sales leaders that are at a bit of a crossroads right now where things aren't working. And I've spoken to founders and VPs of sales about this in the last couple of months. Things aren't working. Do we rip out the SDR team and make our AEs 360? And do we downsize the team, and do we just rip and replace it? Do we outsource? All these sorts of thoughts and ideas are coming to the table. And I liked what you said about iterating. Can you share with me a little bit the thoughts behind that, and for people who are listening who might not have seen that, what your rationale is behind what you said there?
So I'd probably say that anybody that is maybe I can't speak for all of those situations, those cases specifically, but anybody who's got to a point where they're looking to completely rip things out or things have stopped working hasn't been iterating through this period of change anyway, or kind of looking to redefine what their best practices are. I'd say though, in terms of some of the profiles you mentioned there, I think it's kind of what I said earlier about educating internally and bringing all the teams with you. It's not just about it's not just going to be the SDR team anymore, or the AE team anymore, or the outsource team anymore. It needs to be your marketing team, your partnership team, your SDR team, your AE team, all working together and moving in the same direction in kind of, in inverted commas, an all-bound motion. So it's rather than having an environment where people are pointing fingers and saying this isn't working, I think it's now saying, how can we make this work together?
Mhm.
And that's kind of what we're doing as a company as well. I think a few years ago, you'd have even internal teams that were maybe fighting to get attribution on the same bit of pipeline. And I think now it's about celebrating when two teams have had influence on the same bit of pipeline, and using all the teams to their strengths. And yeah, SDRs, if they're just by themselves, sourcing lists of accounts online and making calls, they're going to struggle. Whereas if they're working hand in hand with, as I said, like partnerships, marketing, a growth team and everything else, and they've got that support, then yeah, you don't need to abandon ship.
That is so spot on. I can't even begin to count how many arguments I've seen and been involved in about attribution. And you're so right that actually now the more teams involved, the better. And I think that is we're moving away from this siloed approach of teams to the more teams that are involved, the better, because we've moved away from things being called sales to revenue, and actually all these teams celebrating one goal. So I think that's really really spot on. I wanted to end with one final question. I'm sure, given your role, you're on the receiving end of a lot of outbound and prospecting.
Mm,
And what's one example of outreach that has really stood out to you?
mm.
Might not have necessarily bought something, but one piece of outreach that's really stood out to you.
Great question. It's actually, you know what? I'm in the New York office at the moment, and one of our SDRs here asked me this question this morning. He said he wanted to see the types of outreach that I really like, and I do try and share with the teams when I get a good bit of outreach. I think much of what we do today. I'll start from this kind of approach, and then I'll talk about the specific case.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be intentional about every single touch point and understand the importance of building awareness and your brand. So a lot of people think that each email, LinkedIn message, or voice note needs to be you pitching or selling, but I think much of it is about building awareness or building a brand. And I mean, Aircall has a brand, but each salesperson can also build their own brand. And I'll maybe shout out to Will Falkenberg at Champify here. I think he's probably one of the best examples of an SDR building out their brand on LinkedIn. And you might have seen him posting a fair bit. He has a hot dog in his name, an emoji hot dog in his name, and I immediately, before I'd actually spoken to him, I had him in my mind. I hope you wouldn't mind me saying this, is hot dog guy, which is a brand, isn't it? But it's a brand that
It
kind of
is, yeah.
it built some awareness and it stuck in my head. And he was speaking to other people. He was speaking to SDRs in our team and doing some bottom up selling, and they were referring to him as hot dog guy as well. And that building the awareness, then aligning to something that was quite relevant to us, which is kind of fine. We got 17,000 customers at Aircall, and a lot of them move from one business to another, and they sometimes take Aircall with them. And here's a nice pitch for Shopify, but they help you identify those people, and so that caught our attention as well. And then he was really persistent in booking a meeting. So I think building awareness, aligning with the problem, and then being really persistent, because it wasn't just like one hot dog guy video and it was done. He kept on it, and as I did bottom up selling, and that was really effective.
That's such a great story. I'm going to check out Will's content, and I think what you said there, I think, is a really valuable piece of advice, that not every message has to be a pitch or has to be, everything has to be value add, but it doesn't need, you don't need to bore the ocean with, like, what can I say differently about us this time, and what can I say here, and what can I say there. It's also about building that human to human connection. And even if it is behind a hot dog, right, it's about building that awareness, building that connection, and build something that I think is going to stand out in someone's head as well. So I'm going to check Will's content out, and thank you so much for coming on here, Sean. You've shared so much valuable information. If anyone wants to learn more about Aircall or reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, you can go to aircall.io. No, so you can, with Aircall, yeah, you can do exactly as I said. With myself, drop me a note on LinkedIn. Like, as I said, I'm new-ish to the posting game, but I'm enjoying it. So I'll continue I'll be continuing to post for the foreseeable now as well. And yeah, if you're kind of, I wish from an Aircall perspective, I could kind of like lay out and share what our roadmap looks like in moving forward. But we've hired a new CPO, CTO. I think so much with AI and everything is about kind of
Yeah.
not skating to where the puck is now. You know, the Wayne Gretzky term: don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck's going. And I think I'm really excited about where things are moving. So I'll also try and keep people on top of that when I'm posting on LinkedIn as well,
Yeah.
because of where we're going.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Well, I recommend for our listeners to follow you on LinkedIn and catch up with all the stuff that you're posting. Well, anyway, Sean, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Shebri. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.